to the Hinckley Report. I'm Jason Perry.
On this episode of the Hinckley Report. On this episode of the Hinckley Report, votes are tallied in important elections locally and across the country. The ongoing government shutdown becomes the longest in history. And our expert panel analyzes the latest news in Utah's redistricting case.
Funding for the Hinckley Report is made possible in part by the Cleone Peterson Eccles Endowment Fund and by donations to PBS Utah from viewers like you. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to the Hinckley Report. I'm Jason Perry, director of the Hinckley Institute of Politics. Covering the week, we have State Representative
like you. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to the Hinckley Report. I'm Jason Perry, director of the Hinckley Institute of Politics. Covering the week, we have State Representative Candace Perucci, a Republican from Riverton and Majority Whip in the Utah House. State Representative Andrew Stoddard, a Democrat from Midvale, serving in the Utah House. And Lindsay Ertz, anchor with ABC4 News and host of Inside Utah Politics. So glad to have you all with us. This is an interesting week in politics. We had some elections, Utah, across the country. I want to start with those because we had a lot of interesting local races, some changes of the guard are happening. But I want to start with turnout with you, Lindsay, for just a moment. Of course, all municipalities did not have an election. There are some candidates who ran opposed. So the overall number is around 36% turnout. In some rural counties, like Rich County, 73%. Salt Lake County had 32%. Talk about that just a little bit.
Yeah, when you have 700 voters in your whole county, it's easy to get them to turn out, right? There's a lot of turnout in those rural counties. I think the turnout number is significant, you know, at 36%. That seems high to me. There may be some outliers there that are kind of bloating that number. But I think that having Salt Lake County be really low is really interesting. Maybe it's because there wasn't anything really driving the ballot in that county. We had a handful of city council members in Salt Lake City. We certainly had mayors across the county, but nothing that was really that, you know, just that driver that you usually see that drives turnout on a ballot.
Representative Perucci, we did have some interesting races, and sometimes when you have a big race, it kind of drives turnout. Maybe give a comment about the importance of these local races, given your experience as an elected official, and then let's talk about Utah County.
Yeah, I mean, what's concerning to me is that means roughly 3 out of 10 people voted, and that's of the registered voters. And so I think we see this in the off election year where people really engage in national politics, but rubber really meets the road at the municipal level, and quite frankly, has some of the biggest impacts on locals. If you think about city budgets and their impact on property taxes, or if you think about your trash collection and who's coming to get it, right? So I think it's important people recognize, well, it may not be the hottest and most exciting topics on the ballot, you still should show up to vote. You had some exciting mayoral races and some upsets. So in Provo, former Representative Marcia Judkins beat Mayor Kafusi, and knowing Marcia from having served with her, no one outworks her. She's really, really a workhorse, and also talks about the kitchen table issues and that things that impact Utah families. So she also had a great campaign team. So I think that was quite an upset to see it, but I look forward to seeing what she does as mayor.
Mayor Kafusi, 8 years in the job, and it sounds like she kind of did a concession speech. Is that what we're seeing right now? Is that where we are? Is there still some
There's still
work on the canvassing?
Ballots in Utah County. You know, they were working on that, but I think at the time when she gave her speech, it was a nod to Representative Judkins. Now
and I talked to Marcia Judkins too, who told me that Mayor Kafusi called her and congratulated her. So by all accounts, it seems like a concession. She didn't explicitly say in that post, "I am conceding," but she basically talked about what she's going to miss the most. So it really implied that concession.
That'd be hard. I mean, 8 years serving as mayor of a town she loves, city she loves. I think both these women are fantastic, and just a lot of respect for anyone who's willing to jump in the arena and try and make a difference in their community.
Representative Stoddard, you're watching mayor's race also.
Yeah, I mean, Conwood Heights was a huge issue for me because one of my colleagues, Representative Galen Benyon, was running, and I know that she ran on issues that were really important to her, things that she tackled in the legislature, such as water, air, the canyons, and she pulled off a big upset there.
These are some interesting changes, and Lindsay, we had a couple others. Park City, we had a change there. Ryan,
that race is separated by like 11 votes. So when we say the rubber meets the road, I agree with that. It is like, if you lose a race by 11 votes, you're calling your cousins and your uncles and your aunts, and you're saying, why did you not get out to vote?
So interesting for the sake of viewers too. There is, and you've run for these office, if there is a less than 0.25% difference in the vote, you can ask for a recount and do those again. But Lindsay, to your point, 11 votes isn't much, but that's above that point.
And I think there was a Bluffdale City
hearing process, and I mean, that is a really tight margin. I don't know that I would be claiming victory with 11 votes yet.
I don't know that anyone is claiming victory. I also think there's a Bluffdale City Council race separated by like 10 votes, something like that.
Bluffdale mayor is ahead, the incumbent's ahead by 75 votes right now.
Yeah.
So if anyone thinks their vote doesn't matter, in municipal elections, it certainly does. And I think it's, when you look at the size of these cities and maybe 6,000 to 8,000 people turning out, I mean, decisions are made by people who show up. So be one of those people.
There's an old adage in politics, too. You guys know it as running for office, where you'd rather lose by a wide margin than 11 votes. Because 11 votes, you're like, I just had to go to the grocery store and I convinced 11 more people. Right?
One more visit. It's true. Representative Stoddard, what's interesting about some of the municipalities, we had a couple cities, they're still experimenting with ranked choice voting. Maybe give us a little, maybe you could explain what that means. We had Salt Lake City, South Salt Lake, and Midvale. And I mention this because as this opportunity came up in 2021, 23 cities tried it. We have only a few that are still doing it. Talk about that and what might happen in the next legislative session when you have to revisit this issue. First, talk about what it is.
Yeah, so ranked choice voting was kind of a novel take on voting. So you wouldn't have a primary, but instead you'd be able to rank all the candidates, 1 through however many. I think Sandy Mayer last time had like 9. It's 1 through 9, and then they just do successive rounds, knocking off the people with the least amount of votes. But you get to pick which order you like them. So hypothetically, you'd have more people getting someone that they wanted, as opposed to just the 2 choices. So my city, Midvale, has done this. I think it's a great way to vote. We haven't had the mass amount of candidates that some municipalities have, but it's worked great. And unfortunately, I think the legislature doesn't have the appetite to extend the ability to do that, so it's running out.
Saw ranked choice voting to get caught up in a little bit of conspiracy theories, and Candace may correct me here, but it seemed to be that the Republican side didn't really like ranked choice voting. They weren't sure how it worked. They're not sure how it tabulated, and so you saw kind of the dominant party here in Utah kind of take aim at it a little bit, and it seems to be waning.
I don't think it's a conspiracy theory. I think that right now, voters in general have an all-time low of trust in institutions, and we're having a hard time getting people engaged to vote at all anyways. And with ranked choice voting, it's introducing a new complexity into a historical voting system that there's an expectation of what that's going to look like. I also think there's value in having a runoff or a primary and actually seeing how those candidates realign and what their message shift is. So I think we're down to 3 cities that are doing ranked choice voting. It was a pilot program that started. I do not think there's appetite in the majority caucus to continue ranked choice voting. I wouldn't support that. I think we need to get back to strengthening the elections that we do have. And obviously election integrity has been a discussion point for the last 4 to 8 years that we'll be talking about. But it isn't just a lack of trust and confusion, but I think as well, if you look at these things, it's who's funding the actual program to do it. I know that different cities in my area have looked at it and felt like if you're going to change the form of voting, which is a sacred right as an American, it should at the very least go to a vote of the city, and the citizens could say, yes, we want to adopt that. But that's not happening right now. It's happening just at the city council level, and then people see their ballot and are incredibly confused. So I don't see us extending that pilot any longer, and I think the 3 cities that are doing it has shown it's dwindled in support from the original 23.
Do you think they could then, at the state level, put in a policy to allow these municipalities to do it, though? Because, if the cities want to continue, I see my role as a representative as allowing local control in how they want to conduct their own elections.
I think when it comes to elections, though, counties, right, are the ones who are actually executing the elections, and they funnel into the lieutenant governor's office, and so it is a state call whether or not this is something we want to do. So I don't think we would do that. No.
One final word on this, Lindsay, too, as we talked about the potential confusion or how you understand how it works. The other side of this, what people were talking about, whether or not if you have to appeal, you could be people's number 2 choice and still do it, that it might appeal to maybe make things a little more civil.
Yeah, it does bring in that civility, because instead of saying vote for me, not them, you're saying rank me, and rank me number 1, them number 2. But then to Representative Stoddard's point, the more people you have ranking you, the better chance you have of winning that race. And so it does bring in the less of the disparagement into those races.
But I think things can change in the course of an election cycle, and so having that second check-in, I actually think is helpful. And I think you'll see realignment from candidates who are running.
Well, let's get some national news that impacts elections, but also maybe the future where our Senate goes, our United States Senate. Representative Stoddard, talk about this for just a moment. Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi announced this week that she is not running for re-election. She's been in Congress for 39 years. It's a very long time in there, and she's been a bit of an institution. Talk about her departure on your side of the aisle through the party, and let's talk about some implications for Utah after that.
Yeah, I mean, first I want to congratulate her. That's an incredible career. Regardless of how you view her politics, she did a lot of things that no one had done before her, and I am impressed constantly with the way she handled her caucus, the House, and I may not have always agreed with her, but I respected her. I do think it was time for her to go. I think people overstay their welcome in Congress a lot. We see that occasionally in the state legislature as well. And so I'm glad there's more of a shakeup. I think we do need a younger generation moving into those slots.
Representative, talk about how it impacts Utah a little bit. I mean, you think about this race, it's California, but there were times where her name was even used in races here, like alleging people were like a Pelosi or something like that, sometimes on the other side of issues on public lands or water, things like that inside the state.
Yeah, I would say Congresswoman Pelosi has not been one who's been on the side of, say, Utah values or Utah's policies historically, and I do think term limits, she's a great example of why term limits are important in Congress. She's been in office longer than I've been alive, and so I definitely think, congrats on a very long time in office, but also there's definitely room for a little bit of churn, I think, in Congress and getting some fresh perspective. And in terms of Utah, I don't see it having a massive impact other than, once again, just voters seeing how long she's been in office and shaking their head thinking, holy cow, this is crazy. But she has become an institution because she has been there for so long. I also think it's a shift in the Democrat Party where Nancy Pelosi at one point was Speaker of the House and was kind of the pinnacle level of power for Democrats. But I would say now she's probably too moderate for her own party. And I think you're seeing a huge shift to the left by Democrats. And it's interesting to watch now the Democrat Party have a little bit of this internal struggle and identity crisis. And I think you're going to see more and more of the Chuck Schumers and Nancy Pelosi's go and retire, and you're going to see a new firebrand of Democrat come in that may or may not have a harder time aligning with and appealing to Utah families.
Lindsay, break that down just a little bit too, and maybe just add one more factor to it. Pelosi stepping down, but you also had the passing of Dick Cheney this past week. Some of those names that we've known for a while that have had a significant impact, regardless of what side of the aisle you're on.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a changing of the guard, if you will. A lot of times, for when you're in politics for decades and decades, you become quote unquote the establishment, right? And people try to take on the establishment and stuff like that. So both with Pelosi stepping down and Dick Cheney passing away, you're seeing kind of this shift in both foreign policy and then also with just her seat in California and for how long she's been there and her time as Speaker of the House. I also think she was just very polarizing for especially Republicans. I think one key evidence of that is when she ripped up the State of the Union address after President Trump. I think it was in his first term, but she was a little bit polarizing, but I think kind of worked her way up in the ranks. And so, it'll be interesting to see who kind of comes in to fill those leadership roles.
Can I push back a little bit on something Representative Perucci said? I think, you look at the governor's races in Virginia and New Jersey, and I don't think that there is a shift to the left. I think what this election told us is that the Democrat is becoming more of a big tent as a party. We've got two, governors who were elected with wide margins that are very moderate. And I think, then you've got the new mayor of New York, who's very far left. So I think what you're seeing is just a spread in terms of the party, and I think that's a good thing. I think we need a diversity of opinion, and we need to show that there is still room for moderate Democrats in the party.
I do think that New Jersey and Virginia, the Democrats realize this whole far left, think of the new mayor of New York, socialist approach to form of government wasn't going to work, and they did pivot and start talking about kitchen table issues. And I think that is better for the American people. I think it's better for the American people when Republicans and Democrats aren't so flipping far apart, right? And that you actually can have conversations. So I will also just say, though, historically, Virginia and New Jersey have been blue states. And so we talked about voter turnout. We talked about it being an off year in the midterm cycle. I don't see them as much of a bellwether as maybe a settling back into what once already was. I also think you have to look as well at the campaigns that they run. We talked about Marsha Judkins running a great campaign. In Virginia, I heard that she also had a phenomenal campaign running. But I do think the fact that someone like Mamdani in New York was even able to get elected is pretty crazy when you look at the things that he's proposing from a policy perspective. They generally they don't align within the American system of government, and it is very concerning that the left fringe, you could say, or the far left keeps pushing that farther and farther out, rather than what it might have been 50 years ago.
Hey, Lindsay, let's break down this idea that Representative Perucci has talked about a little bit, too, about what issues seem to matter in this election. Through the eyes of Utahns a little bit, because it seems like the campaigns were a little bit less about social issues, more about
kitchen table issues. And I was going to make that point to Representative Perucci's point, is that you saw sort of what Democrats are calling the Democratic takeover, because to the old James Carville adage, it's the economy, stupid. If you can't, put food on your table, if you can't pay for your health care, if you don't have health care, you're not thinking about what Democrats really ran on in 2024, which we saw them get obliterated over, which is democracy is failing and Trump is going to bring down this country, and he's really, going to end this 250-year experiment that we've been doing. So the message was more about how do we end the shutdown? How do we, feed our families? Prices are still high. How do we get affordability? How do we have better housing policies? Those kitchen table issues that you're talking about with your family, as opposed to democracy is failing.
I think it goes back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I feel this way as a Republican. We talk about lowering taxes, having free markets, and empowering families. that when you have someone who can't put Cheerios on the table for their kids, and you're talking about DEI policies or equity ambassadors, that does not resonate with them because they're worried about paying the bills. And so I do think maybe with the government shutdown top of mind and more people are using our food pantries and volunteering at it, it's recentered our focus hopefully on what's important in making sure families are able to be successful and pay their bills.
Representative Starr, address that a little bit from the Democratic side, because was this a conscious choice to decide to get to those particular issues? They take advantage of the moment that Trump was not on the ballot for this election. There's a government shutdown. People are starting to maybe not get their checks. Talk about how all that played into the Democratic strategy, particularly through the lens of a Utahn.
Yeah, and I hope the strategy isn't just taking advantage of the government shutdown, but that it is a real shift towards what people care about. And I think there's room for all these policies, but really Democrats' main focus should be how well is our government taking care of our people? Are we making sure that they have good jobs, good health care, food availability? And I hope that that's a permanent shift. But I do think that coupled with the shutdown made it really prescient in a lot of people's minds.
Let's get into some other very local issues, and our legislators particularly tied to this one, redistricting. Can we talk about that for just a moment? We talked about this on the show quite a bit. All of you are connected. You were on the committee, Representative Perucci, but just tell us what's happened procedurally. We've had the court has heard something, and we're about to get an opinion of some sort. Tell us what not what the answer is going to be because we don't know, but what is the judge supposed to decide?
If I had a crystal ball, I'd love to be able to tell you.
I'd love to know.
So November 10th is when the judge, it's the stop dead date on when the elections office needs to have the new maps. So we should hear from Judge Gibson on November 10th. They had 2 series of evidentiary hearings where they bring in the experts and review the maps and some of the different issues at hand. I will tell you this has been an incredibly frustrating process because it is very, very clear in the Utah Constitution that the role of redistricting lies with the state legislature. That is enshrined in our state constitution and feels very much like the judiciary has been painting outside of the lines in terms of what their role and responsibility is. So I'm very curious to see what Judge Gibson does on November 10th with the maps that she's been given.
So I sort of have a question on that. If it's the role of the legislature to draw the map, like right now what we're doing is the evidentiary hearing, right, of did Map C follow Proposition 4? What happens if it doesn't? Whose role is it then? Should the judge have a remedy to issue if there's not a lawful map, or does it go back to the legislature to draw?
So the plaintiffs in the actual hearing do not contend that we didn't follow Prop 4 in this latest wave of redistricting.
Yes, they do.
They think in terms of, but in hitting all the standards in Prop 4?
Yeah, they're saying that it was a partisan gerrymander still because
they presented the most partisan gerrymandered maps in the world that doesn't even pass any of the tests and breaks up cities and counties, which is the #1 priority. So I think it's a partisan. I don't think it's an actual legal battle. If you were to go back and look at what we did this second wave of redistricting, we followed the judge's order to a T. We did not look at any partisan data, and we ensured that cities and counties were not split up when they didn't have to be. So,
right, and they're also alleging that your expert had partisan data on his computer when he was drawing those maps. I'm not saying he used it, but that's what they're alleging.
Sure, and just like if you were to look at the map that the Democrats presented in our committee, there is data that and video evidence that they had partisan data up. I don't know
not
about
the map that was submitted by the plaintiffs. That map is
invalid. There's 2 different maps.
We're taking over your show, Jason. I'm so sorry.
Go ahead.
No, so
Go
I
ahead and
have to
finish
say this though, if we are in a really crazy place as Utahns, if a judge now is legislating from the bench. Like this, take a step back from redistricting. If a judge can say, don't like it, I'm gonna create my own policy here, completely inappropriate, whether you're a Democrat or Republican. Prop 4 was a statutory change, and as such, the legislature has the ability to amend and adjust it, which is why there was a bipartisan compromise bill after Prop 4 was passed that a Democrat ran in the House. She's still serving to create this new process that we followed, and now we got, there's this lawsuit again on it. But it is a much bigger issue for Utah if now we're seating and saying, no, a judge should be able to draw a map. The fact that she's even considering taking a plaintiff's map, nowhere in Prop 4 does it outline that.
Well, it does outline that there is a remedy if the map is enjoined, which is what
happened. But based off the Constitution, here's what, to me,
that's
her option is
what
she can say. So I'm going to answer you.
Yeah.
What she would say is, sorry guys, you failed again, you got to go back and redraw your map.
Okay.
To me, that is within the boundaries of what the judiciary would do. But because she took so long on a case that has been going on 5+ years and sat on her desk for months and months and months, we're up against a deadline for 2026.
I want one more issue from the Democratic side, because it's interesting, as we're talking about redistricting the state of Utah, there was a proposition on the ballot in the state of California who does have an independent redistricting commission. It's called the Election Rigging Response Act. Talk about this, because the Democrats in California were pushing for this for a 3-cycle period to adjust their own maps, which would give them, the Democrats, 5 additional seats in Congress. So it's not just our discussion we're having here. It sounds like other places too.
Yeah, and this may be the unpopular opinion, but I think this all mid-cycle redistricting is stupid. It's really people trying to rig the system to win control of the House, and I blame our president for kicking it off. And I think we should stick with the norms we've had that have worked. I personally like the Independent Redistricting Committee, and I wish more states would adopt that. And
I think it's interesting.
But the California, what they've done with this proposition is they've overrode their independent commission.
Right.
They've said, never mind, it's going back to the legislature because we got to go gerrymander some more so we can get 5 more seats in Congress. That's insane. I agree. This whole midterm, this actually, to me, you're pulling the rug out from what is the process we've historically done. And we didn't want to go back and redistrict. We had already set our maps in 2021 and had to go through the process. The very expert that the Democrats brought into our committee has a paper he published that says the independent redistricting commissions actually end up gerrymandering more than the legislature does. And he, in his paper, did an assessment on our 2021 map and said, Utah didn't gerrymander. This is a fair map. It was the Democrats expert they brought in that said that. So to me, it's a double standard for Democrats to say, look, we have to have a commission. Oh, except for in California right now, we need to go back and redistrict so we can upset the balance of power. It's changing the rules mid-game, and both parties are doing it.
I want to get to one more issue before we close. We are still in the middle of a and I don't know where it is, the government shutdown. We're still doing this, the longest shutdown in history. And Lindsay, talk about this for just a moment, because there are about to be some serious things felt here in the state, and not just on things like SNAP benefits for food, but also airlines are going to be impacted starting this very day.
Yeah, I think now that the election is over and we don't kind of have the potential implications on people being elected, and the fact that flights are starting to be impacted. There is no group of people who flies more than our congressional delegations who have to get back and forth from D.C. to their districts. So I hope you start to see some movement on this, but now that people have missed paychecks multiple periods, we're in a legal battle over whether we fund SNAP benefits. Utah's not funding SNAP benefits in any sort of way, although they are giving money to the food banks, right, to help there. So you're just starting to see these really, really serious impacts on everyday people that hopefully will push the needle.
Yeah, I mean, I would just push back. We have set aside $4 million to backfill the needs of families who we want them to have food on their table. This is ridiculous. We are in a historic shutdown at this point, and the Senate has voted 15 times. Republicans have voted 15 times to reopen the government, and the Democrats are holding the American people hostage to try and extend the Obamacare premiums and the deadline there for health care. That doesn't expire until December 31st. I don't think it's fair to hold single moms and their kiddos hostage so that you can extend something that, quite frankly, when Democrats had the majority in Congress, they should have done under President Biden. And instead, they kicked the can just a few more years. They could have pushed that deadline much far out. So this is a shortfall on their part. And I think that they need to be adults and come to the table and say, we will negotiate health care aside from our constitutional responsibility, which is the power of the person actually funding the national government.
The last 20 seconds here, Representative Stoddard, because the Democrats and Republicans are both having a similar comment in Utah about get this fixed so people can get the food.
Oh, absolutely, they need to. But I don't think it's a one-party shutdown. I think we need more adults in Washington that are willing to compromise and work together to help, everyday people.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much for your great insights. A lot of interesting things happening. And thank you for watching The Hinckley Report. This show is also available as a podcast. Thank you for being with us. We'll see you next week.
Funding for The Hinckley Report is made possible in part by the Cleone Peterson Eccles Endowment Fund and by donations to PBS Utah from viewers like you. Thank you.
Show your daughter how much you love her with this beautiful gift.
Oh shoot, did I cancel this? Oh dude.
To have you with us. What a week in politics.
On this episode of the Hinckley Report, a landmark case on redistricting could have major impacts on Utah elections. The longest government shutdown in history comes to an end, and Utah's leaders respond to major issues in the state.
Funding for the Hinckley Report is made possible in part by the Cleone Peterson Eccles Endowment Fund and by donations to PBS Utah from viewers like you. Thank you.
Your team's
Hello, and welcome to the now Emmy Award-winning Hinckley Report. I'm Jason Perry, Director of the Hinckley Institute of Politics. Covering the week, we have Kate Bradshaw, Mayor-elect of Bountiful City, Spencer Stokes, founder and partner of Stokes Strategies, and Ben Winslow, reporter with Fox 13 News. So glad to have you with us. What a week in politics.
What a week.
Wow. We're gonna
Longest week.
The longest week, particularly if you're reporting on it, particularly the people who are watching the politics. But I want to start with the government shutdown, Spencer. If we can start with you. You've been involved in federal politics for a very long time as well. Now the longest shutdown in our history, 43 days. It used to be something you didn't talk about so much, but now it happens with, more often than you would think.
I won a bet. I came closest to saying when it would reopen, and I calculated that based on Donald Trump wanting to break his last record. So we broke the last record, but the government shutdown's never good for anybody. It's never good for politics. I don't think anybody wins in a government shutdown. I think everybody loses. And so a lot of people are trying to assign, well, who are the winners and who are the losers? And I think in reality, everybody it's a loser for everybody. Well, but a lot of people woke up the first morning of the government shutdown and said, what's changed in my life? And that's never helpful for the agencies.
Yeah. So Kate, that is a very interesting point, because even a lot of Utahns, as we did our polling for quite a while in this shutdown, not a lot of people were particularly affected. But I am curious about the long-term political impacts on this. As you are talking to people that you represent and otherwise, who seems to be getting the sort of the benefit of this compromise? Who's getting the recognition like they brokered this deal? Democrats, Republicans?
I think it's an interesting mix. On one hand, we are just starting to see the impacts of the thing the Democrats were holding out for, the impacts to health care and health care subsidies. But they didn't hold out long enough to see that one really come full circle and start to really impact the cycle. So I think the Republicans probably come out slightly ahead because, we're now back open. The impacts were to smaller groups. I don't want to minimize that those groups were deeply impacted. Anyone who was a federal employee, a federal contractor, anyone who was flying in the last several weeks, and then people who were going without because of SNAP in particular and food stamps. So there were pockets that were really deeply hurt. For many of us, though, I think life kind of went on. And so you have to wonder if it was worth the cost on the Democratic side.
Yeah. Break that down, Ben. With all these great interviews, you've done such great reporting on this as well. So the Affordable Care Act, these subsidies for that were really what the Democrats were holding on to. They didn't get that. So talk about that compromise and what that means. It was a pretty long holdout for something else. What did they get?
That's a good question, and I think we're going to have to see what they get and whether this spills over into next year with an election cycle and a very competitive election cycle. Did they get what they wanted? You get sort of not really even promises that you're going to get this healthcare funding dealt with. It's just kind of still hanging out there. other than you just finally broke the log jam. So this could have longer-term repercussions, especially with premiums and things that people are paying going up.
Yeah, then Kate mentioned the SNAP benefits. About 170,000 Utahns are getting those SNAP benefits. Talk about that particular group too, because that money is coming back now. The flight controllers, those kinds of things seem to be coming back online.
For people who are on SNAP, you have to feel for them, because this has been nothing but a boomerang. What do you have every day? What are you getting? What are you not getting? Are you getting benefits? Are you not? Are you getting this money? Fortunately, at least according to the Department of Workforce Services, the latest words that we have from them is that the November payments will be going out right away. So people will not have to be necessarily going without. Food banks took some hits too, especially, the longer these things went on. Federal employees who went without paychecks, this is impacting it. You're living on borrowed money. Yeah, you do get back paid later, but you're still, the margins are thin for a lot of people. People don't have these cushy cash reserves like they used to.
You find out quickly that states can manage these things better than the federal government. And I think our state stepped up in a big way to try to soften the blow on the SNAP recipients. But the other thing you find out is the post office continued to run. And is there a case to be made for air traffic controllers being handled by the aviation industry and price per tickets, so that it's out of that, boondoggle of what's going to happen in the next government shutdown? So I think states and agencies that can run based on the fees and the people paying, they may be making the case for us to look more at that.
Jason, it was a weird thing to watch this happen, especially, we're at local government and at state government. We really pride ourselves on being able to always balance budgets and find those compromises and move things forward. If I had to identify one kind of bright spot in all of this, I was impressed by communities stepping forward with donations to food banks, checking in on their neighbors who might be struggling with food assistance, or federal employees. So many individual stories and then collective stories of people pitching in. It's the only heartwarming part to an otherwise kind of just really disappointing continued showcase of just not being able to get this really basic thing done.
Spencer, before we leave this one, you're a political strategist. Talk about 2026. We got elections coming. You got the midterms. Sometimes you have swing on parties. If you're advising these parties about how to take advantage of either side of this, where do you go?
Well, the president's party never does well in a midterm. I do think there was the political pundits overcredited what happened on election night. There were no surprises on election night this year. All the blue states did blue things. California did new maps. Virginia, really a growing blue state. New York. So I don't think there's a lot to be learned on that front. I will tell you where I think, if you dig down into this a little deeper, I think there was an effort on the Democratic Party in Utah to run their nonpartisan races as Democrats versus Republicans. And in the areas where they were swing districts, a lot of mayors lost in Democrat areas because the party ran actively, and the Republican Party did not do that because they're nonpartisan. So if I were to say, if there's anything to look at, it's that. It was in the middle of the government shutdown, and you could make hay over that, and that worked in some of these races.
I was just say, as a municipal candidate and a candidate that was up the cycle,
unopposed. Let's go ahead and add that.
You were that good.
It is, yes. Yeah. Thank you. It was an interesting phenomenon to see, particularly the Democratic Party. There were a few areas where the Republican Party wanted to kind of try and match efforts, but I have never seen that level of interest from the parties in municipal cycles in Utah. Very different.
Are municipal elections right to be partisan now?
I hope they're not, frankly. I think the issues we work on in local government aren't partisan.
I think you could see the legislature talk about that. Should municipal races be partisan?
It's possible that they could talk about it. I've always thought that it's weird that we have some different dates in the two cycles. Why get people used to certain dates in an odd year versus an even year? I think we should talk about that. I personally am I'm a registered Republican, but I haven't found that that's really a big part of my service in Bountiful.
Right. Let's talk about something that also has political ramifications, Ben. Redistricting. Wow. You've been following it so closely. I don't think you've been sleeping. Talk about what just happened. The redistricting court case. Give us an update.
So the judge chose a map, and she kind of took everybody by surprise by choosing plaintiff's map 1. We used to have pizza, donut was the big debate. Well, we have donut now. We got rid of pizza. You now have a district that is pretty much centered, Salt Lake County. Little bits of Salt Lake County, southern part, are kicked into other districts because there's no way to avoid splitting Salt Lake County because of the population, but that's what we have. You now have what the judge's ruling says is that this is the more competitive and aligns with the tenets of voter-approved Proposition 4. And so this is the map that everybody is now going to be running under, barring any kind of an emergency intervention by the Utah Supreme Court. And at this point, the legislature has not sought an emergency stay, so it looks like this is the map that is going to be there. It is again, by the ruling, more competitive. Democrats are really excited about this. They are jumping in all over right now, already very early, declaring themselves as candidates for this district that does look like it will be extremely competitive for Democrats, more so than the other districts that are in this same map.
Fun to watch. I mean, I'll just be honest. As a Republican who has to, deals with this all the time, it will be fun to watch the Democrats fight amongst each other, because they haven't really had to do that. It was all who's going to be the sacrificial lamb in these districts in the past. But now they're actually going to, this is a winnable seat. And but, you get down to the question, should a non-elected person be doing maps? I don't think anybody disagrees that these are partisan issues. Drawing maps are partisan. They're partisan everywhere. They're partisan in Texas, in New York, in California, and what we've just had happen is a non-elected person decide they were going to choose the map.
But
one
of
single
Prop
person.
4, though, was to make it nonpartisan.
Understood. Prop 4 is the first citizen initiative direct piece of legislation that has not been that they've sued on. So we've had marijuana, we've had the credit unions many years ago took a direct piece of legislation, and the legislature either threw it out or altered it significantly through negotiation. But you'll notice that Better Boundaries was not the group that sued. A separate group went out and formed a couple of different interest groups in the state, but it wasn't Better Boundaries because they had been the ones that negotiated with the legislature. Now, was it a put up thing, a straw man for this, for Better Boundaries? Probably. But nevertheless, this is the first time that people's representatives didn't win out on direct initiatives coming, and they went directly to the courts.
So, Jason, it's really a battle that we're discussing between two different articles of our state constitution.
Yeah, let's get into that.
Yeah, Article 6 and Article 9. So different powers are enumerated in each of those articles. In 6, that's where you have this rights that are reserved to the people to alter or reform government. 9 is where the legislature derives its power to redraw maps. And so that is kind of the heart of this question on Proposition 4. Did the people exercise Article 6 when Proposition 4 passed? And, how does that stand up and compete with the legislative powers that exist? The legislature and legislative leadership clearly feel strongly about their powers under 9, but they're both enumerated, they're both important, and so now the separate but equal judicial branch is playing a role.
I want to get going to continue because the Utah Supreme Court still has to consider the overarching case. The map has been decided, sure, that's in place, but this idea of the right to alter and reform your government versus the constitutional authority of the legislature to draw boundaries, that's going to have to go back. That's still appealable. That is expected to be appealed to the Supreme Court. They're going to have to settle this again. They've already once before upheld the right to alter and reform government in this lawsuit, which started this all over again. That was a few years ago. So this is not done by any means.
When it comes to Articles 6 and 9, my view is always, when the issue's more complex, let's let's allow the people's representatives to negotiate and deal with that in a more deep dive. I don't think the general public is, they're brilliant, obviously. They elect all those representatives, so we can't say that they're not brilliant. But the fact of the matter is, when a person comes to your door and asks you to sign something, you're not getting all the data, you're not getting all the facts, and legislators do. They think about these things, they research them, they have a staff that tells them, gives them data, but a person at the doorstep and when they go to the polls, it's all just about name ID and about the best campaign ad.
I want to get into a couple of the responses from the legislature to all these points, but Kate, I want to read what the response was from the President of the Senate and the Speaker of the House, because it does get into these constitutional questions. It warms my heart when you're quoting the Utah Constitution, but that is at the heart of it, and this comment that they said kind of gets to where their position is on. So maybe break this down for us. I just want to read it to you because this was the swift response to the court ruling. This is Stuart Adams and Speaker Schultz. They said, "This isn't how government should work. Our system depends on transparency, accountability, and respect for the roles defined in our Constitution. Judges are meant to uphold the law as written, not rewrite it to serve political ends. Nothing in Utah's Constitution gives the courts authority to impose maps designed by private groups. Redistricting is not a courtroom exercise. It is a constitutional duty entrusted to the legislature, the body directly elected and accountable to Utahns. When that process is overridden, it weakens the voice of every Utahn."
So clearly in this quote from both of our top two legislative leaders, they're leaning in hard to that Article 9 and the powers that they are given and feeling like it has been inappropriately taken from them and that the courts have played an inappropriate role. And they are clearly upset, and they have made many comments beyond just that about what they intend to do, and so we expect to see some of those appeals and things like that. The challenge, and of course, this was a process that was really tricky for your average person to follow. I know in his reporting, Ben spent many hours listening to those hearings. I decided I would wade through the 91 pages of Judge Gibson's order, which I found fascinating. But it's not something that maybe the average person is going to dive into. And so they have, I think, a point on the transparency and the truncated nature of what was ordered and how fast it had to go through. I think maybe they have also forgotten Article 6, though, and that there are those powers that are left to the people, and they did exercise them. And so it is still to play out.
They believe those powers are that they elect them. They believe that the people do have a say in this, and the say they had was electing their representative, and that they've sent those people. I tell people all the time, if you wanna know what the district looks like that voted for a person, they look just like the person they voted for. I mean, the Democrat representatives and senators look like the districts that they represent. So I believe the legislature is saying, look, the powers that belong to the people are electing us. And we have a right to do that.
But the root cause of the proposition was that they believed that and voters approved it, that they didn't believe they were being represented, that the legislature was exercising institutional arrogance, if you will, and that they weren't listening, they weren't doing this, and that's why they wanted it in the first place. And it was in the same election cycle as cannabis and Medicaid expansion.
And it passed in 4 counties in the state, and all the rest of the counties it did not pass in. And so the argument always was by legislators and state senators would say, well, it didn't pass in my district. It didn't pass in my district. And so you have what's happening throughout the country. The urban areas are getting bluer, and the more rural, middle America areas are getting more red. And that's what you see here in the state of Utah as well.
I want to get to the political ramifications too, but just to follow up on your last point there too, because the idea that you're kind of describing in the Constitution is these are co-equal powers. Power of the people through the initiative referendum process, the legislature through their legislative process, with these 2 lenses that you just had. But where do you see this going then? If you could just put in your crystal ball just a little bit, Kate, because that question has not exactly been completely answered.
The question has not been answered, and Spencer is very right to point this out. I believe that there are 3 separate but equal branches given different authorities and powers. The legislature, I believe, thinks that there are 3 branches of government and perhaps their powers are bigger and more significant because of their elected process. The only way we are going to solve this is through a Supreme Court decision. And it may be a state Supreme Court decision, or it may go all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. And that will, of course, continue this little tension about whether these branches are separate but equal or separate and slightly unequal.
Good. Let's get to the political ramifications. Ben, can you talk about this for a moment? Because this new district, which at the very minimum is purple, might lean blue, this new first congressional district that this still is called number 1 going forward, that has some nationwide implications and also local implications.
Right. We're dealing with the balance of the House, and this is a free-for-all right now. I think at this point, over the last week, it'd be more easy to keep a list of Democrats who are not running than those who are. We are seeing some big names jumping in already. Ben McAdams, Kathleen Reeby. You know, there's a longer list of people who are considering it. Nate Bluen, Caroline Gleich, Misty Snow. You know, this could turn into a wild ride. As Spencer pointed out, you know, the Democrats are going to get an experience of what the Republicans experience all the time. And so this is pretty wild to see.
It sets the Republicans into a topsy-turvy mode as well, because now you have four Republicans, and you have 3 Republican seats, or lean Republican, and you have one that leans Democrat. So who's going to run in which district? And that's a big question. I mean, you know,
how does this get resolved?
Well, Blake Moore's base has been up north, you know, predominantly. Celeste Malloy's base has been down south predominantly. So this really, now you've got to start asking: is somebody gonna retire? Are we gonna have 2 people running against each other that are sitting members of Congress? It really is creating some interesting political dynamics for the sitting delegation.
Okay.
Spencer's exactly right. I find that fascinating. I think the big winner, if there is a winner out of the new maps, is that Blake Moore's district is largely intact. So, you know, the conventional wisdom is he's probably safe. He stays and he runs in what used to be 1 and is now numbered as 2. But you know, 3 and 4 have changed significantly. You know, 3 is geographically huge and very, very difficult to travel and drive in, because it touches both, you know, the eastern and the western sides of the state, and it does move these traditional bases from some of these current numbers.
One of the things that the elected representatives have always kind of taken into account is the members of the House and Senate in the state. Can a member that represents a district get home at night? Can they go visit different parts of their district and still get home? I mean, that district number 3 is massive. It's just a massive land area, and so this is something that courts don't think through, because how do we give better representation to the citizens of the state? Is it driving 12 hours to get to an area of your district to represent them? I mean, to get from St. George up to the northeast corner of the state, it's not a straight path. So it is something that the legislature does take into account. In the olden days, the legislature took into account, we want all of our members of our delegation to have representation of Salt Lake County, so that the media will cover them when they're doing something. These are things that are complex issues, and a judge is not the right person to decide those complex issues.
Ben, put all this in context too, because you made an interesting comment before about sometimes these initiatives, things that drive turnout. And I'm curious what might happen in this new CD1, as they call it, which is essentially all of Salt Lake County, as you said, because there are implications for the people who jump in that race. But if you have some initiatives on the ballot and you have several Democrats running, it has the capacity of impacting local races as well. Members of our House and Senate here in the state.
Right. This is going to definitely, right now it's purple to maybe blue, if you're looking at it that way. And you do wonder, what is conventions going to look like? And this is for all races, really, not just the congressional race. You know, are you going to see more hyper-partisanship, both on the left and the right, really? Because, you know, you're going to have more rural districts now, and you are going to have a much more urban-focused district. And, you know, in order to advance out of convention, are you going to have to swing further left or swing further right? You know, and does that trickle down into these legislative seats, even further down in these partisan races? That is to be determined. I think we're going to have to watch and wait and just grab your popcorn.
You know, Jason, there's a couple races further down the ticket in Salt Lake County that could definitely be impacted. They've been swing seats, but won by Republicans. You know, Representative Jim Dunnigan, Representative Steve Elison, Senator Wayne Harper. Those have been tough races, and if you are driving a certain turnout at the top of the ticket in a general, what do their races look like? And so, if I were further down the ticket running in Salt Lake County, this would be a map I would be poring over and studying.
Really quickly, Ben, conversations about impeachment.
TBD, really. Representative Matt McPherson, almost immediately after the ruling, posted on Twitter, or X now, that he had opened a bill file. I asked the Speaker about that, and the Speaker kind of left it at "we'll see." So really, it's unclear if they will proceed with an impeachment
of the judge
for her ruling.
Or you could just wait until she's up for retention election and run a campaign against her.
Yeah. So that's possible too. We have like maybe 40 seconds left. Kate, talk about that a little bit too, because that was an instant response. Bill file said it was open almost immediately, but it seems like the legislature might have the courts in mind this next session.
Yeah, I think if the judiciary will probably have a difficult session, whether it's some policy changes or budgets or appropriations. The legislature has clearly signaled unhappiness broadly with that branch of government. I think Spencer's idea is probably one that, the flash, the immediate frustration with what happened resulted in Representative McPherson's statements in his bill file. I think what Spencer has suggested on retention is a much more likely scenario.
And think about what happens if the balance of power in the United States House of Representatives shifts. This battle was started long before the Texas and California one. But if this shifts based on this judge, for sure you'll see a retention election campaign.
It's going to be our last comment. Thank you for your insights. And thank you for watching the Hinckley Report. This show is also available as a podcast. Thank you for being with us. We'll see you next week.
Funding for the Hinckley Report is made possible in part by the Cleone Peterson Eccles Endowment Fund and by donations to PBS Utah from viewers like you. Thank you.